Alright, so I'm going to show you guys how to set up remote control on your robot. So I went ahead and plugged in the robot using USB, so the robot's showing up over here. You are going to want to connect your robot using Bluetooth eventually, and you can do that anyway. So one of the things you can do is click on the hub, and then you want to click on the three little dots here in the upper right hand corner and rename your hub. Give your hub a unique name so that you can connect to it via Bluetooth. Then when you search for it via Bluetooth, it'll come up. Now, if the other Lego program has been used to program the robot, then it will ask you to update the firmware. Go ahead and do that. It'll take about 5 minutes or so. And then it'll ask you to update the motors, and you can skip that. There's a option where you've already updated the motors. Just click that and ignore it. You don't need to do that. That's totally fine. So just update the hub and then move on with your life. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the setup. So you want to set your movement motors. And your movement motors, I set mine to A and E. That's my default. That's what I go to. You're going to want to set your wheel size. So in my case, I've got the smaller wheels on this robot, so 17.5 centimeters moved is correct. If you're using the large wheels, it is 27.308. Okay. And then you can set your movement speed. Because we're remote controlling it, we can go ahead and set this to 100%. You might want to dial it back. Depends on how twitchy your robot is. So now in the bottom corner here, you'll see show block extensions. You're going to click on that. I don't know if the window is coming up for you guys, but you're going to want to add the Xbox One controller if it's not already added. So go ahead and click Add for that, and then you can click and we can also get more movement. We're going to need that. So you're going to want the more movement object or more movement extension and the Xbox controller extension. Okay, so what that'll do is over on the left here, one of the circles will be for Xbox One and one of the circles will be for more movement. Okay, all right, so next up, we want to go ahead and start doing stuff with the Xbox One controller. So I'm going to go to Control, and I'm going to get a forever loop. And I'm going to put that here. And then I'm going to go get an if-then-else block, and I'm going to put that here. So for the else, I'm going to go to movement, and I'm going to say stop moving for else. Now for the if, I'm going to go to operators, and I'm going to get an or operator, and then I'm going to get a greater than operator, and I'm going to put that in the left side of the or. So, what do I want? I'm going to go to operators, and I'm going to get an abs of. And what this is the absolute value of some number. And so for that, I'm going to say if the absolute value of the left joystick y-axis is greater than 10, or, and then I'm going to get another greater than, I'm going to get this greater than, and I'm going to say if the absolute value of the left joystick x-axis is greater than and here again, I'm going to say 10. Okay? So, if that's the case, then I want to do something. So I'm going to go to More Movement, which is why I had to add that. And I'm going to say Start Moving at, and then you'll see here, there's, right now it says 50% speed, 50% speed. So, I'm going to go back to an operator, and I'm going to get a plus, and I'm going to put that here on the left. And here for the plus, I'm going to go to the Xbox One controller, and I'm going to say left joystick Y-axis plus left joystick X-axis. Now for the other side, I'm going to get a minus operator, and I'm going to say left axis Y. Alright, so I'm going to get a left axis, and I'm going to switch this to Y axis minus left axis X axis. Alright, now what left stick X axis? Now what that's going to do is it's going to handle all of the mixing so that my Xbox One controller, the left stick, will control the motors for movement. And so when you click play, it's going to say we need to switch to streaming. So you go ahead and switch to streaming. And now, if I move the X-axis, it's going to move my robot based on the X-axis, and then when the stick is centered, it's going to stop moving. Here we have the regular driving stuff, and we are going to add a controller or controls for the lift module. So I'm going to go to Events, and I'm going to get a When hat. Now this is called a hat because it's rounded at the top and you can't connect things to the top of it, but there's the tab on the bottom and you can connect things to that tab. So we're going to get an operator, and we're going to say greater than, and we're going to change this number. You can change it to 10 or 5, doesn't really matter. And then we're going to get an absolute of, and so the ABS value of something. And we are going to the Xbox One tab, and we are going to get this left stick X-axis, but we're going to change this and make it the right stick Y-axis. So when the right stick Y-axis is greater than 5, so when that is the case, we are going to go to Motors, and we are going to, oh, actually, you know what? We're going to do something different. Let's go to the lower left-hand corner, and we're going to add more motors. So if you go to the More Motors tab and click Add, we're going to do that. And we're going to go to More Motors, and we are going to set motor at, right? So before we do that, let's go ahead and get a control and say repeat until. So we're going to get a repeat until, and we're going to get an operator, and we're going to get a less than, and we'll say less than 5, and we're going to get an absolute value of, and so we're going to say if the value goes above 5, we're going to repeat whatever's inside of this loop until the value drops below 5, and that value is again the right stick Y-axis. So I'll change this from left to right. and change this to y-axis. And then I'm going to say, go to more motors, and I'm going to say start motor at, and see how it says start motor at 75% speed. And instead, we're going to go to the Xbox One, and we're going to take that right stick y-axis. Right? So we're going to set the motor, and the motor for me that we're trying to do is motor F. So we're going to set motor F to this joystick value. Now, once that joystick drops below that value, we want to stop that motor. So we're going to go to stop motor, and we're going to select stop motor F. Okay? So, when we run this, moving the right joystick up will move the motor in one direction, and moving the right joystick down will move the motor in the other direction. Okay, and we can move the motor slowly, or we can move the motor quickly based on how far we move the stick. Last up, we need a way to open and close the gripper. Now, the easiest way to do this is we can go to the events, and we can grab a when, and we can just say when the we'll grab the is a pressed, right? So this object here, and we can change this to any button. So we can say when the Y button is pressed, we can go to motors, and we can say run motor, and for me it would be motor B for 1, and we're going to change this to seconds, okay? And you can change this number. I like 0.5 because 0.5 seems to work. So when the button is pressed, the Y button, we're going to move that motor for 0.5 seconds, and then we can go back to the events, and we can grab another when, and we can say go to the Xbox One tab and grab another is a pressed, and in this case I do want button A, and I'm going to say if that's the case, we are going to run motor B in the opposite direction. So we'll just change the direction here for 0.5 seconds. Okay, and now this is for my gripper, and what this does is if I press the button, it opens the gripper. If I press the A button, it closes the gripper. Now that's a really easy way to do this and to make this work. Now let's say we want to make the gripper open and close using a toggle. So I'm going to go to variables, and I'm going to make a variable, and I'm going to call that variable open close, and then I'll select OK. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make kind of an overarching structure. All right. So I'm going to go back to events, and I'm going to grab another when, and this time I'm going to go to the Xbox, and I'm going to grab the A is pressed, but I'm going to switch this to the right trigger. So when RT is pressed. Okay, so when RT is pressed, and then I'm going to go to controls, and I'm going to get an if then else, and I'm going to say if, and then I want an equal to, right? So this is a toggle, and what we're going to do is we're going to say if the variable open close is equal to 1, then we want to set open close to 0, and if not, we want to set open close to 1. Now what this is going to do is basically when I press the right trigger button, it'll set open close to 0 if it's set to 1, and if not, if it's set to 1, it will set it to 0, right? So it's set it to 0 or 1, and it'll basically toggle it back and forth between the two every time I press this button. So now I'm going to go back to Events, and I'm going to grab a when, and I'm going to grab from Operators, I'm going to grab an equal. And here I'm going to say when the variable, right, so we'll go to Variables, open close, equals 1, I want to move motor, right, so I'm going to go to A run for, right, so I'm going to set this to 0.5 seconds. Alright, and I want this to be motor B. So when I press the trigger, it's going to, when open close is set to 1, it's going to run the motor for 0.5 seconds. Now I can just duplicate this block, so I'll select duplicate, and now I'm going to say when it's equal to 0, we want to run it in the opposite direction for 0.5 seconds. So what this will do is this sets it up so that using the right trigger will open and close the gripper. I press the trigger once, the gripper should open. I press the trigger again, and the gripper will close.